Welcome to the history section.
Today, we're looking at the foundational years of Napoleon Bonaparte. We'll be tracing his education, his early military training, and really the key events that brought him to the attention of the French government.
It's a look at how raw talent was really forged by the hardships of the time into a decisive historical force.
And we begin with what was, for him, an absolute necessity, gaining access to the royal schools. This is the period from about 1778 to 1784.
And at that time, there was this fixed idea in society that true fame, true advancement, was found almost exclusively through military achievement.
That philosophy really dictated everything, and it's essential to grasp just how ambitious this was for the Bonapartes. Corsica had only recently been ceded to France.
So their claim to nobility was tenuous at best.
It was, and securing those placements required substantial influence. They achieved this mainly through Monsieur de Marbeuf.
And he was a key figure.
A very key figure. The Bishop of Autun, and conveniently, the nephew of the Corsican governor. That connection was everything.
So the family had a strategy for their sons, Joseph and Napoleon.
A very careful one. Joseph, the elder, was pointed toward the church, so he was placed at the College of Autun.
But Napoleon was different. He was already showing an aptitude for the more technical side of things.
Exactly. So he was intended for the Navy, which meant attending the very prestigious military school at Brienne. But first, both of them needed a preparatory course.
To catch up, essentially.
To catch up on the language, the culture. So they both went to Autun first. Their journey began on December 15th, 1778, and it was a journey that, really severed their purely Corsican identity.
And before they could even get there, they had to make a stop in Florence.
Yes, and this wasn't just a casual stop. It was a bureaucratic necessity.
They needed papers.
They needed papers to prove the ancient nobility of the Bonaparte family. It was a non-negotiable requirement for a school like Brienne. The military system, even on the brink of revolution, was still based on birthright.
And the research confirms that Charles Bonaparte, their father, he succeeded. He got the patent of nobility confirmed.
He did, which allowed him to officially sign his name de Bonaparte.
A small change, but a significant one.
It was huge. That shift from the Corsican Bonaparte to the French noble de Bonaparte, that was the key that unlocked his son's entire career.
So Napoleon's stay at Autun was actually quite short.
Only 3 months. But it was incredibly intense. It was all about language acquisition. He went from his native Italian and Corsican dialect to achieving conversational fluency in French.
In just 3 months.
He learned to write small essays, do translations, enough to get by at Brienne, where he arrived on April 23, 1779. It was a linguistic and cultural trial by fire.
And it's at Brienne that we get the first real sketches of his character.
We do. From Bourbienne, who would later become his private secretary, he noted Napoleon's Italian complexion and his very keen, penetrating gaze.
But it was his tone that stood out.
Yes. Bourbienne described his conversational tone as having a dash of bitterness. It was the sound of a boy who felt completely out of place.
And this wasn't just youthful angst. It was rooted in the politics of his childhood.
Absolutely. The French conquest of Corsica, the family's misfortunes, it all left a lasting impression. He arrived in France essentially as a nationalist from a subjugated homeland.
So he was political from a very young age, grave before his time, as some say.
This was compounded by poverty. His family might have gotten him into the system, but they had very little money.
Which must have been mortifying among his aristocratic classmates.
It was. He was ridiculed constantly. For being Corsican, for his accent, even for his name, which they considered old-fashioned.
But what's fascinating is how he dealt with it.
Yes, he was recorded as being a brave, very manly boy, but he never appealed to the tutors. He never reported anyone.
He handled disputes himself, directly.
Very directly. There's an anecdote about him and Bourbienne. They were both imprisoned for several days by the schoolmasters.
And they refused to name the other students who had neglected their duties.
Exactly. They took the punishment together. It shows an early, powerful sense of solidarity and a personal code of conduct. It's a precursor to the kind of loyalty he would demand from his marshals.
And his mind was already working on a different level, especially under pressure.
We see that in his examinations. There's one account of a general officer, probably bored, who posed a final, hypothetical, tactical problem.
What would you do if you were besieged in a fortress with no provisions?
And Napoleon's response was instant, no hesitation. He completely reframed the problem.
He said, "So long as there were any in the camp of the enemy, I should never be at a great loss for a supply."
He didn't see a problem, he saw an opportunity. The enemy's supply line was his potential supply line. It's a stunning piece of tactical foresight that foreshadows his entire approach to warfare.
This way of thinking then gets a practical outlet during the winter of 1782.
A very, very severe winter, one of the coldest in French history. The snowfall was so heavy that all the usual outdoor activities were impossible.
So Napoleon, who was 13 at the time, saw an opportunity in the snow itself.
He did. He proposed that they use the snow to develop practical knowledge and, pass the time. He suggested dividing the entire student body into two armies to fight for control of the playground.
And they went for it.
Unanimously, and they chose Napoleon to command the whole mimic war. He immediately took unquestioned authority and turned what was a game into a serious 2-week military exercise.
It became quite elaborate.
Incredibly so. They built extensive fortifications, trenches, bastions, all out of compressed snow. It was so well organized that local villagers would come out to watch the battles.
There was even a moment that taught a lesson in military ethics.
Yes, a critical moment. The opposing sides started putting small stones in their snowballs to gain an advantage.
A dirty trick.
And Napoleon's own men wanted to do the same. But he became enraged. He flatly refused, saying he would either win without resorting to such tactics or he would accept defeat.
It's quite a strong stance for a 13-year-old in a snowball fight.
It is. It shows a commitment to a kind of professional conduct, a set of rules, that contrasts sharply with the political pragmatism he'd employ later.
So how did the war end?
It ended with a formal siege. Napoleon orchestrated the capture of the enemy fort with a speed and combination of moves that apparently astonished the professors.
It was a clear preview of his later battlefield methods.
A very clear preview. The games only stopped when gravel started getting mixed in with the snow, causing some actual injuries, and the school had to step in.
So after these displays at Brienne, it's no surprise he was marked for advancement.
Not at all. In 1783, at just 15, he was chosen as one of only 3 boys to be transferred from the provincial school at Brienne to the Royal Military School in Paris. A huge honor.
And this was a direct result of his talent in mathematics.
His mathematical talent and his steady application. It was enough to override any of the social stigma he'd been facing.
The military records from that time give us a really interesting snapshot of him.
They do. Born August 15th, 1769. Height, 4 feet, 10 inches, 10 lines. Health, excellent.
And his character was noted as mild, honest, and grateful.
Which is fascinating. But the academic assessment is the key part. Distinguished in mathematics, tolerable in history and geography, indifferently skilled in ornamental studies and Latin.
The conclusion was that he would make an excellent sailor and deserve the transfer.
But his arrival in Paris was a shock to his system. He was a provincial boy in the center of French luxury.
A compatriot described him as looking like a newcomer, just dazed and vulnerable.
And he felt his poverty intensely. He later said, "All these cares spoiled my early years. They influenced my temper and made me grave before my time."
He found the environment at the Paris school completely unsuitable for training soldiers.
He found it overly luxurious, decadent even, and it led him to do something quite remarkable for a cadet. He wrote a formal memorial, a complaint, to the superintendent.
What was his argument?
That the delicate, expensive lifestyle was completely wrong for poor gentlemen. It didn't prepare them for the hardships of war or for returning to their own modest homes on leave.
And he had some very specific suggestions.
Radical ones. He proposed that students should get ammunition bread, basic soldiers' rations, that they should be forced to clean and mend their own clothes.
That couldn't have gone over well with his classmates, many of whom were dukes.
It did not. The memorial didn't benefit him at all at the time. But it's a critical moment. The military schools he later established as emperor were based on this exact, severe, disciplined plan.
So it was a deeply held principle.
It was. And it reflected his own life. He always insisted on magnificence in his public roles, but his personal life remained, as his secretary put it, economical and even parsimonious.
His time in Paris also had its academic frictions.
It did, particularly with his German tutor, Bauer. Napoleon was making poor progress, and it seems he was more focused on the practical sciences.
There's an anecdote about an artillery examination.
Yes. Napoleon missed German class to attend it. When Bauer found out, he remarked sarcastically, "I have always believed that none but a fool could learn mathematics."
But a much more significant incident revealed his political thinking.
Far more significant. He was reproached by someone, reminded that he was a pensioner of the king, that his education was a royal charity.
And his reaction was furious.
Absolutely furious. He shot back, "I am not educated at the king's expense, but at the expense of the nation."
That's an incredibly bold statement for a cadet in that system.
It's a critical insight. His loyalty wasn't to the crown. It was to the abstract idea of the nation. A mindset perfectly tuned for the revolution that was just around the corner.
And his hard work paid off very quickly. He passed his final examination in August 1785. He was barely 16.
And he secured a commission as a second lieutenant in the artillery regiment of La Fère, stationed at Valence.
History tells us that the professor who oversaw that exam, Monsieur de Ferralio, wrote a note in the margin of the records.
A famously prophetic note, it said, "A Corsican by character and by birth. If favored by circumstances, this young man will rise high." He saw the potential and perhaps the danger right there.
So this brings us to his first professional posting as a second lieutenant at Valence, starting in September 1785.
And this is where he really begins to mature intellectually, balancing his duties with intense self-study, all while observing the political fractures growing in France.
Socially, he spent time in the drawing room of a Madame de Colombier.
Yes, and there's some suggestion he may have courted her daughter. But his real focus was always his studies. He was constantly reading Plutarch's Lives.
Trying to model himself on the heroes of antiquity?
Very much so. He was also writing a history of Corsica, trying to reconcile his identity. It was praised by the Abbé Raynal, but he couldn't find a publisher for it.
And politically, the regiment itself was a mirror of French society.
Completely divided. You had the monarchists and you had those who wanted radical change. Napoleon very openly sided with the latter, with the patriots.
He later reflected on that choice with a kind of brutal pragmatism.
He did. He said, "Had I been a general, I might have adhered to the king. Being a subaltern, I joined the patriots."
It suggests his choice was less about pure ideology and more about where the opportunity for advancement was.
He was making a calculated move into the rising tide, and he soon got a first-hand look at the chaos that tide was bringing.
In early 1792, he's promoted to captain and he's in Paris.
Right at the peak of the revolutionary upheaval, and he's an eyewitness to the mob violence.
He sees the storming of the Tuileries on June 20th.
He and Brienne followed the mob, and when he saw Louis XVI on the balcony, forced to wear the red Jacobin cap, his contempt was immediate.
He called the king a poor driveler.
And his assessment was purely military. If he had swept away 500 or 600 with his cannon, the rest would be running yet.
So his solution was immediate, overwhelming force.
Grape shot. That became his lifelong prescription for civil disorder, an absolute belief in imposing order.
And this view was reinforced by the events of August 10th.
Even more so, the massacre of the Swiss Guards. He supported the National Assembly's principles, but the violence on the streets disgusted him.
He described the scenes as hideous and revolting.
And it solidified his view. He always abhorred anarchy. He believed there was no remedy for mobs but force, and that you had to act first, before any negotiation.
Soon after this, he returns to Corsica on leave.
He does, arriving in September 1792. But the family is in dire straits, living mostly on his officers' pay. And the politics there are explosive.
General Paoli, the governor, has denounced the National Assembly and is looking for English support for independence.
And Paoli tries to recruit Napoleon. He flatters him, calling him one of Plutarch's men.
But Napoleon refuses.
He does. His calculation was that Corsica was too weak for independence and that adhering to France was strategically better than falling under English control.
So he sides with the French Convention.
And he gets his first real taste of command, leading a battalion of National Guards. His first mission is to take a small fortress, the Torre di Capitello.
Which he does, but it doesn't last.
No, he's besieged by Paoli's forces. They hold out, reduced to eating horseflesh, before they're forced to escape to the sea.
And this choice had severe consequences for the whole family.
Devastating. With Paoli in power, backed by the English, the Bonapartes are banished. Napoleon watches his childhood home get pillaged and burned.
The family becomes refugees.
They flee to Nice, then Marseille, living in poverty. And this is the moment Napoleon decides France is his only home. He said, "In a revolution, a soldier should never despair if he possesses courage and genius."
Which brings us to Toulon. August to December 1793, the moment his career ignites.
It really does. Toulon, the main naval arsenal, had been handed over to the English. For the French government, which was in the midst of the Reign of Terror, its recapture was absolutely critical.
The military situation was a mess. They needed a competent artillery officer.
Desperately. So an adjutant Cervoni is sent to Marseille to find one, and by sheer chance, he runs into Captain Bonaparte.
Just arriving, covered in dust from the road.
Yes, he just escorted an ammunition convoy from Avignon, where, incidentally, he had already distinguished himself by single-handedly preventing a Republican retreat with just 2 cannons.
So Cervoni knew he'd found his man.
He invited him to a cafe, and we have this amazing description of Napoleon at 24. Sallow skin, a very large head, sharp, piercing eyes, the look of intense energy.
And he's sent to Toulon immediately.
Where he's quickly promoted to brigadier-general of artillery and given command of the siege. The situation was grim. 3 months had passed with 0 progress. Let's analyze the force defending Toulon. This wasn't just an English garrison.
No, it was a true coalition effort. And that multinational character created its own problems.
Command and cohesion issues.
Big ones. The total garrison was about 17,000 men, a massive force. It included 7,000 Spaniards, 5,000 Neapolitans, 1,600 French royalists, 1,500 Piedmontese, and then the corps, the most disciplined element.
The 2,200 English regiments under Colonel O'Hara.
Right. And while 17,000 sounds like a goodly force, the reality was they were stretched incredibly thin across these very extensive outlying works needed to protect the city and the harbor.
Plus you have language barriers, different military doctrines.
Divided loyalties. The various commanders are all reporting back to different national leaders. It's an inherent weakness in the defense from day one.
And the geography of Toulon is paramount here. You can't understand Bonaparte's victory without it.
You really can't. The city itself has a simple wall, easily defended. But its true defense relied on this protective ring of strong, rocky heights and excellent forts. The whole city is shielded by the imposing mass of Montferrand.
It's like a vast natural barrier.
Precisely. And you have specific nodes in this network. Fort Malky to the east, a series of strong works along the ridge of Montferrand, and the very strong Fort Nobosquet near the inner harbor.
But the most vital defenses, the ones that really mattered,
were the ones controlling access to the main roadstead, the area where the Allied fleet could safely anchor, and those were the forts at Point-la-Guillette and Balaquier.
This brings us to the first serious engagement after Bonaparte's arrival. Initially, he's just focused on harassment.
Right. He doesn't have the resources for a full siege yet. He uses what he can salvage, 8 24-pounders from Marseille, and on September 28th, he places 5 of them at a point called La Brega.
And the effect is immediate.
Instantly recognized as a serious threat. A 24-pounder is a massive piece of ordnance. 5 of them together could target ships in the roadstead. The enemy knew right away this threatened the safety of their fleet.
Which was their supply line and their escape route.
Their entire center of gravity. And the English response was swift and decisive. They land 3,000 men at the Liguiette promontory, seize the hill of La Grasse, and rapidly build a formidable fort.
The one the French nicknamed Little Gibraltar.
Later named Fort Mulgrave by the English. And that position was chosen brilliantly by the Allies. It was on a hill that prevented the French from bringing their own artillery up to command the harbor entrance.
So as long as Fort Mulgrave held,
the French couldn't get to the ground that mattered most, the water. This one counter-move by the English forced the French to completely reevaluate their entire siege strategy.
And this impasse leads directly to the defining debate of the siege, what we can call the Battle of the Plans.
Yes, the conventional wisdom, which dominated the thinking of the Republican generals, was based on a plan from General d'Arcon, suggested by the Committee of Public Safety itself.
And then that plan was?
Typical 18th century warfare. Slow, methodical, safe. Capture all the forts around Montferrand first, which could take months of attritional fighting. And only then, open trenches and conduct a regular, prolonged siege against the city from the land side.
Predictable.
Very. And the Allies were perfectly prepared to endure it.
This is where Bonaparte's alternative vision comes in. It shows his ability to think about military objectives in terms of strategic leverage, not just brute force.
At a crucial council of war on November 25th, with new, more capable commanders like Dugommier present, Bonaparte presents a detailed scheme he'd already prepared in writing on November 14th.
And his central thesis was revolutionary compared to the land siege mentality.
He argued that a conventional siege was inefficient and, more importantly, unnecessary. His core insight, and this is the key, was this: to drive the enemy from the harbor is the preliminary point. And perhaps this operation alone will give us Toulon.
The breakthrough insight. The fleet was the lifeblood of the garrison.
Their supply line, their escape route. If the fleet was forced to leave the safety of the roadstead, the defenders would be cut off, isolated, and eventually forced to capitulate. He shifted the entire focus from the city walls to the harbor.
And he identified the specific target needed to do it.
Coin-Leguiat. It had to be taken first because of its geographic dominance.
The high ground.
Exactly. Capturing Leguiat would allow French guns to bombard the Allied ships with hot shot.
Cannonballs heated until they're glowing red?
Designed specifically to set wooden ships on fire. The ability to burn the Allied fleet out of the harbor would negate their entire defense.
He cast aside all the minor considerations, the land forts, Montferrand, and focused on the single main objective. This is that sense of perspective that would define his later campaigns.
And he had to fight for it. He contended with conservative generals who wanted to keep focusing on Fort Mulgrave or the other outlying works. Bonaparte argued that the artillery they already had was enough to suppress Fort Mulgrave's fire while the main effort was prepared against Leguiat.
So the research suggests that while others might have had the initial idea, it was Bonaparte's detailed written plan and his forceful advocacy that won the day.
Indisputably. His genius was in the detailed how and the persuasive why. At that Council of War, November 25th, his unorthodox vision was adopted. It was a pivotal shift.
And the final plan reflected his ideas completely.
Entirely. The right wing of the Republican Army would focus its main assault on Leguiat, with only a feint on Fort Malbosquet. The left wing would assault Montferrand to divide the defenders. But the key to victory lay in controlling the roadstead. A classic maneuver of economy of force.
With the plan approved, the work begins.
Intense, relentless work, under Bonaparte's personal direction. And fortunately for them, after the capture of Lyon in October, the Republican army in front of Toulon swells to about 40,000 men. They finally have the manpower.
And Bonaparte was seen as the most energetic officer there.
General Dugommier, the new commander, was a veteran and an excellent soldier. He quickly recognized Bonaparte's talent and drive, and basically left him in charge of all the artillery business for the crucial right wing.
The logistical challenges must have been immense.
They were. He was fighting the chaotic supply lines of the revolution as much as the enemy. He had to set up foundries, create powder trains, scavenge for everything, all while under enemy fire.
This period also gives us that legendary anecdote about the young non-commissioned officer, Junot.
A beautiful illustration of Bonaparte's personal magnetism. Junot was acting as his clerk, taking dictation on a battery's earthwork, totally exposed to fire.
And a cannonball lands nearby.
The explosion showers the paper, and Junot himself with dirt. And Junot, with this incredible coolness under fire, just says, "So much the better. I shall need no sand to dry the ink."
Bonaparte must have been impressed.
It did two things. First, it marked Junot in his mind as a potential lieutenant, someone who kept their head. Second, it was a moment of shared peril that boosted morale. It showed that leadership wasn't just about plans, but about personal courage.
To get ready for the final blow, Bonaparte had to build batteries extremely close to the Allied works.
Exceptionally dangerous positions. One battery was so exposed to enemy fire that he struggled to find volunteers to man it.
So how did he solve that?
He appealed to their sense of pride. He dubbed the exposed work the redoute des hommes sans peur.
The redoubt of the men without fear.
And by turning the dangerous duty into a badge of honor, he immediately got more volunteers than he needed. He often worked alongside them, leading through shared peril, which earned him the respect of the common soldier.
The first major test of these new batteries came with the Battery of the Convention on Oren's Heights.
Yes, and its fire was immediately effective, commanding Fort Malbosquet and dismounting several enemy guns.
The Allies couldn't ignore that.
No. Colonel O'Hara, the English commander, launched a fierce counterattack with 2,300 men to capture and silence the new battery. And the assault was successful at first. They entered the works and spiked several of the guns.
A moment of acute danger.
But Bonaparte was anticipating it. He reacted with decisive speed, marching a battalion through the trenches and taking the attacking English force in the flank.
A classic maneuver, hitting them when they thought they'd won.
And in the melee, the momentum shifted completely. O'Hara was wounded and captured. Dugommier arrived from another direction, threatening to cut off their retreat entirely.
So the English retired hastily, losing nearly 500 men.
And O'Hara's capture was a huge blow. He was the central figure of command and experience. His removal crippled Allied morale and the entire command structure, clearing the way for the decisive move against Fort Mulgrave.
And that move came in mid-December. By the 14th, Bonaparte had concentrated his firepower.
30 guns and 15 mortars, all aimed at the two critical targets, Little Gibraltar, Fort Mulgrave, and the Leguiat position. He began a heavy, steady bombardment that lasted for 2 days.
The goal wasn't just to annoy them.
It was to systematically destroy the defenses of Fort Mulgrave. pulverize the earthworks, and prepare the way for the infantry assault.
The final storming was set for the night of December 17th.
A coordinated effort. The main storming column, 8,000 men, would go for Fort Mulgrave. Simultaneously, Lepoip would assault the Ferrand forts to divide the defenders' attention.
This was the moment of truth for Bonaparte's entire vision.
It was. The capture of Mulgrave was the prerequisite for taking Liguiette and thus winning the harbor. The whole siege hinged on this.
But they lost the element of surprise.
They did. The vanguard ran into enemy pickets at the foot of the hill. The exchange of fire alarmed the garrison, calling the defenders to the walls.
It devolved into a chaotic engagement in the dark. Bonaparte's horse was shot from under him.
And the initial assault wave was actually repelled by the alerted garrison.
So what turned the tide?
Success came from an opportunistic move. A small party of French soldiers found a weakness, a broken casemate, probably damaged by the bombardment, and they managed to get inside.
That was the breakthrough.
That was it. More men poured in, overwhelming the garrison. The fort was taken. Bonaparte himself received a slight wound in the leg.
And at the same time, Lepoip's assault on Ferrand succeeded.
Devastatingly effective. The Allies had no high ground left.
The consequence was immediate. Bonaparte's confidence was unwavering.
Dugommier, the general-in-chief, was exhausted. Bonaparte, energized by the victory, told him, "Go and rest yourself, General. We have captured Toulon. You will sleep there tomorrow."
And he didn't wait.
No.
Yeah.
He immediately trained every available gun from the newly captured forts onto the Allied fleet in the roadstead below. The final application of his strategy: control the harbor, win the city.
And for the Allied fleet, that was an existential threat.
Dundas, who had taken over from the captured O'Hara, called an immediate council of war. Their garrison was reduced, isolated, and their retreat was compromised by French guns. The decision to evacuate was made quickly.
The evacuation began that night, December 18th.
A frantic operation under the threat of French guns. And before leaving, the Allies burned the arsenal and 20 French ships of the line and frigates to prevent them falling into Republican hands.
The Republican army entered the next day, and there was a real danger of mass tillage.
To prevent that, the convention representatives issued a decree. All property of the citizens was declared forfeited to the army.
A way to maintain order.
And it was later redeemed by the city's wealthier citizens for 2 million francs, which effectively funded the victorious army.
So Toulon was Bonaparte's first true feat of arms. It got him national recognition.
But this period of success comes to a sudden halt.
A very abrupt one. He's arrested and imprisoned at Fort Carré near Antibes.
On suspicion of treason.
The charge was related to a secret intelligence mission he'd undertaken to Genoa. The politics in Paris had shifted, and his mission suddenly looked suspicious.
Even young Robespierre was involved, trying to help him.
He was. And Napoleon's aides, Junot and the others, they urged him to escape, to choke the guard and flew.
But he refused.
Flatly. He relied on his innocence. He wrote to Junot, "My conscience is the tribunal before which I summon my conduct." He knew escaping would brand him a criminal forever.
And he was eventually vindicated.
His papers were examined, nothing was found, and he was honorably discharged. But the period of his arrest had a very strange and very useful side effect.
He became an expert in Roman law.
It's an incredible story. His cell had almost nothing in it except one huge old book, a digest of Roman law. With nothing else to do, he read it cover to cover.
So for 10 days, he was just saturated with Justinian.
Exactly. And years later, as first consul, he would stun the Council of State with his deep knowledge of Roman law while they were drafting the Code Napoleon. It all came from that prison cell.
After his release, he goes back to Paris to find work, but he hits a wall.
A bureaucratic wall. The head of the military committee, a man named Aubry, objected to his youth.
And Napoleon's reply was characteristically sharp.
"One ages quickly on battlefields, and I have just left one." Aubry was offended, and it stalled Napoleon's career.
He was then offered a command he didn't want.
An infantry command in La Vendée. He refused it, insisting his expertise was in artillery. He said, "Few have commanded artillery with greater success."
That refusal got him struck off the list of active generals.
He was effectively unemployed in Paris. Things got so desperate, he petitioned for a commission to go to Turkey. He was dreaming of becoming king of Jerusalem, still believing in his star of destiny.
This period of stagnation ends dramatically in October 1795, the 13th Vendémiaire.
The turning point. The government, the convention, was in danger. The National Guard, backed by royalists, was planning to march on the Tuileries with 40,000 men.
And Napoleon just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
He was at the theater when he heard the news. He rushed to the assembly where the politicians were panicking.
One of them, the Ross, remembered him from Toulon.
Barras stood up and said, "I have the man whom you want. It is a little Corsican officer who will not stand upon ceremony."
So they give him the command.
Second in command, technically, but he made it clear he would have absolute non-interfering control. He told them, "Once my sword is out of the scabbard, I shall not replace it until I have established order."
The odds were not in his favor.
Not at all. He had 5,000 soldiers against 40,000 insurgents. And his only real weapon, 40 cannons, were located 5 miles away at Sablons.
His first order was critical.
He dispatched Major Murat to get those cannons immediately, and Murat just barely made it, beating an enemy detachment by minutes. Napoleon had his instrument of order.
So the next morning, the National Guard advances.
They do. And as they march down the streets toward the Tuileries, Napoleon's artillery, which he's positioned perfectly, opens up with grape shot.
The effect was devastating.
The action was over in less than an hour. The streets were cleared. Order was restored so quickly that the theaters in Paris reopened that same evening.
It was a brutal but brutally effective display of control.
And Napoleon knew it. He wrote to his brother Joseph immediately after, saying simply, "Fortune is on my side."
The political reward was immediate.
Within 5 days, he was second in command of the Army of the Interior. Soon after, he was commander-in-chief. He was now the most important military figure in Paris.
And he became a figure of both fascination and fear in high society?
Very much so. People would point him out as the man who commanded the troops on the 13th Vendémiaire. And when a lady asked him how he could fire so mercilessly on his countrymen, his reply was ice cold.
A soldier is only a machine to obey orders.
A chilling line. But for him, it was consistent. He believed that the authority of the state had to be absolute to prevent the kind of mob rule he'd witnessed in 1792.
And it's at this point that his personal life takes a decisive turn.
It does. It starts with a young boy, Eugene Beauharnais, who comes to him to ask for his executed father's sword. Napoleon is moved by the boy's tears and grants the request.
And the next day, the boy's mother comes to thank him.
Josephine Beauharnais. Napoleon was completely captivated by her beauty and her charm, her esprit.
And they married soon after, on March 5th, 1796.
A marriage that cemented his connections to the most powerful men in France, like Barras. It was the final piece of his political ascent.
With Paris secure, the government turned its attention to the collapsing army of Italy.
They needed a new general. And Napoleon, at 26, having proven his decisiveness, was the choice.
The one director apparently thought he was too young.
To which Napoleon famously replied, "In a year, I shall be either old or dead."
He took the command, promising Carnot that even though the army was destitute, he would answer for the rest.
A promise he kept by launching his first Italian campaign and supplying his army entirely at the enemy's expense, using the very skills and resolve forged through all those years of hardship.
The examination of his early life really shows that his grand strategies later on, they were all rooted in this analytical, disciplined approach he developed from his school days.
It proves that a seemingly minor officer, with that combination of mathematical talent and sheer will, can rise to seize control when political chaos demands exactly that kind of decisive action. The question isn't whether a man like Napoleon could rise, but whether the revolution could have survived without him.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed learning something new. That's all for now, but in case you didn't notice, there are a lot more episodes on this subject available on this channel. If you're enjoying these historical podcasts, please like and subscribe and share with other history buffs.
While this is an AI recording, the research that has gone into this production is comprehensive and focuses on very specific moments in history, designed to bring as much detail to the listener as possible. Thanks again for listening in.